Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Couple of Nukes. As always, I'm your host, Mr. Whiskey, and today we are going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects, which is writing. I've been able to feature a lot of authors on the show, and every time there's such a different perspective, a different writing journey, because it's truly unique, just as every book is unique. The writing journey to create that book and the author themselves are so unique. So I'm excited to sit down today with G. Michael Hoff to talk about his books, and as we'll get into, there are many of them. And we're going to talk about one of the saddest things, in my opinion, is that I've met so many people who wanted to write a book, who had these amazing ideas, stories to tell, whether it was fictional, nonfiction, but just gave up or felt like they didn't have that writer spirit in them or they couldn't do it. And so I'm hoping today's episode will be inspiration for you to finish that idea. You know, it always starts as something so small, but I know from my personal writing journey and some of the books I published that it will grow on its own, sometimes more than you thought and wanted to do. And so we're here to get into that. So, Mr. Hoff, I'd love for you to introduce yourself first.
First, thanks for having me on, Mr. Whiskey. It's great. It's an honor to be here to kind of pontificate about writing and my military journey and my writing journey, publishing, et cetera, et cetera. A little bit about me. I'm just a guy I grew up back east in Maryland on a farm, had a really good childhood. Eventually wanted adventure, so I went in the Marine Corps, did 6 years, three deployments there, got out, did a bunch of cool, interesting jobs from a commercial diver to bodyguard for over a decade and then transitions. Instead of using my body, I decided to use my brain. I kind of went from physical to cerebral, and got into writing and entrepreneurial endeavors as well. But the writing journey really paid off for me. I've been very successful at it, and started out with a children's book back in 2012. And then, which I wrote under the name Jeffrey Hoff. And then I wrote my first apocalyptic novel in 2013, which I wrote under G. Michael Hoff, not to kind of blur the lines between children's illustrated books and apocalyptic fiction. And then that book just took off. Big, huge deal with Penguin Random House. Now I'm 40 books later, two publishing companies I own and operate, and of other adjacent companies that are attached to publishing. So I'm really knee deep in the world of writing and authorship and publishing. So that's where I am today.
For sure, as soon as you said a children's book, having already looked at your other books, it's like that's quite the different it's just like a completely different picture. Looking at your other
Yeah.
books, a lot of them have kind of war scenes, dystopian images, that the text itself is kind of like that edginess to it. So I was like, I had to ask, what kind of children's book was it? What was the theme and message of that book?
It was a children's illustrated book that you would read to, toddlers up to like first grade. And it was just followed a dog named Kiki and his adventures. That's what it was. And it really, the birth of that was when my daughters were very young. I was the one that kind of read to them a lot. And so I just loved telling them stories and just hang out with them. And so I was reading the books. And one night I asked my wife, I said, what do you think if I like did my own? Like, how hard could this possibly be? It's kind of a
Right,
silly
right.
question, right? And because you look at the actual text in a children's illustrated book, you may be looking at 800 words. That's it, right? But then there's a lot more goes into it, illustration, things like that. I didn't illustrate it, so I did write it. It was a fun. I kind of based it off one of the many stories I would tell my daughters at night, and then got it illustrated by these wonderful illustrators down in Argentina. And the book came out in 2012. I kind of wrote it under Jeffrey Hopf, and then I got the idea to do a novel, and I didn't want those two lines to blur, like I mentioned
Of
earlier,
course, yeah.
because I had thoughts of like doing more children's books, but I didn't. That never happened because the novels just took off. Like the first novel, just when it landed, 10 days later, it just went viral, and I never looked back. And then I set to getting sequels out, and just I really just put all my focus there, and never got back to that children's book. And again, I didn't want to blur the lines. I wanted the brand of G. Michael Hopp to do novels, hard hitting action adventure, apocalyptic dystopian stuff. But so that's
Right.
kind of the reason, the different names and the G. Michael Hoff thing.
No, I get that. In my personal opinion, as a writer, who's published a couple of books and's got more coming out this year, I've always wanted to do a children's book, but it's to me more difficult. I can write, realistic science fiction and all these big words and talk to adults, but when it comes to children's books, like you said, the word count is very small and you have to use language that, you still get the message across. You're not kind of
Mhm.
like looking down on a child's intelligence, but you're also speaking to them at their level. And for me, that's just as someone who writes a lot of big words kind of stuff, to go down to that level and try to still get the message across can be very difficult. And it's also a very competitive market. There are so many children's books out there. I remember last time I went to the library just looking, I'm like, there's so many children's books that you wouldn't imagine. So I totally get that. Like, how hard could it be? And it's a different task than writing the young adult or the post-apocalyptic or in my case
Mhm.
the hard sci-fi. So that's an interesting transition. And do you think that you'll ever go back into those waters of writing children's books, or do you think you've officially closed that for good?
I'll never say I've closed anything for good. Like people ask me if I would ever retire. I had never planned on ever retiring. I'm just going to continue to write, continue to create and produce until I just fall over at my computer or whatever. There's no reason
Right.
to. If I ever need breaks, like I'm kind of in the midst of a little bit of a break because I did hammer out 40 books in like 10 years. So there's that why I have that break between my latest
Yeah.
novel, which I released in January 2023 till now. I've been launching other companies that are kind of adjacent to publishing and writing and it just very much creatively doing stuff and overseeing two publishing companies and overseeing kind of publishing other people's books and seeing consulting as well, seeing, taking new authors and kind of coaching them and mentoring them all the way through to the idea till actually the book is in their hand and having successful launches for them because I've been doing it long enough now. I know how to do that, have that formula down, I believe. Yeah, I would never say never. It really just depends. When my daughters, if they ever bless me with grandkids, maybe I'll have that itch come back to me again, and
Right.
I'll just jump into it. Right? It was a time and place. The children's book's great. I had to hustle. Man, I got all my money back. Like, I it did it. You're right. It's incredibly competitive, right? When you look at the space and it like I was never going to make any money or make my money back by just selling it exclusively on Amazon. So I had to like literally hit the pavement. And so I just created this marketing plan and I just went and read at like preschools and kindergarten. And then I offered for the parents that they can get an autographed copy. And I literally hustled for like 9 months and I made money on it. I paid back the investment in the book because illustrated books while you think, yeah, 800 words isn't much, the
Uh,
expense is the
colored
illustrations.
ink.
Oh, yeah. It's the colored
Yeah.
ink, exactly, because that price jumps up. You go from just black to you're adding colorization, you're in a whole new thing. And then if you go into hardbound, well, that just adds,
Yeah.
even more money to it. But then you're just looking at the illustrations. If you want to do them right, unless you're that person, which we're writers, we're usually not illustrators, you have to
Yeah,
hire that out, right? And so you have to find the right illustrator, and that's not inexpensive. That's easily in the thousands of dollars. So,
for
but I
sure.
got my money back, so I was really happy about that. So, and that's something that I think writers need to look at, and you seem pretty savvy about it.
Oh,
We're
yeah.
not just storytellers, we're not just creators and writers. We also have to have put on the hat of business. We have to understand the marketplace. We have to understand how to market and promote. And I think some authors, my experience over the years is a lot of writers don't like that, and they don't fashion themselves as that. And what they don't realize is even if you're with a publishing company, they're not going to do, unless you're J.K. Rowling, Stephen King, they're not rolling out the red carpet. They're not going to like give you lavish budget to promote your book. And you still have to promote it yourself. And so you have to find very
Yeah.
creative ways of doing so. Um, yeah. So be prepared if you're going to be self-publishing or even just publishing in general, you're going to have to learn the business of book selling.
Right. And that's one of the unique things about the past few years is podcast guesting. Like I said, I've had a lot of authors on the show, and there's a lot of podcasts that feature just authors or highlight authors. And that's something that really in the early 2000s, a lot of authors weren't guesting on podcasts. Maybe they were
Hmm.
going on TV shows or local newspapers, where it may be. But now podcasting has presented this unique opportunity to integrate the marketing and highlighting your book series while also promoting you as a person and integrating lessons you've learned. Like we're going to get into your military history here and how it ties into your work, as well as is applicable advice to everyone, right? So that's a very unique opportunity that, I think a lot of authors don't think of. They're like, and one of the things we discussed in a previous episode too is you never know about that right person, right time, right? So I've
Hmm.
had some authors who they try to hold book signings and only 5 people showed up, 10 people showed up, maybe a couple family and
They're lucky
friends.
if they get 10 people to show up that it's
Yeah.
not their family.
Yeah, and but as we discussed, all it could take is the right person who
Yeah.
shows up, and maybe they're a marketing expert, maybe they're someone famous or influential, and they love your book. Next thing you know, they bring it to their book club or whatever it may be. We had a guy he decided just to bring up his book to someone on an airplane next to him. Guy was a film producer, said, "This book would be a good film. I'd like to work with you on this." So you you're you never know when that opportunity may come. So you got to
Hmm.
keep marketing even if it seems like you're not reaching anyone because it's not about, thousands of people you reach and none of them buy your book. It's about maybe you only reach 10 people and they all buy your book and leave a review, right? It's about those actual results. And I think one of the things that I find truly inspirational is a lot of the authors I've had on my show have been parents who wanted to express something to their children. So, like, a great episode was with Peter Gunn. He said, I want my daughters to love epic poetry like I do, but there's not a lot of good female representation in that they are being drawn toward. So he set out to make female empowered, specific epic poetry. In your case, you want to reach your children. So I think it's really awesome that parenting kind of opens up this, well, there's not this thing out there to provide my children with, so I'm gonna have to make it myself. I think that's really like, as a parent, super cool and inspirational. But I want to circle back around to your military service, how that affected your journey with writing, your mental health, your time for writing, all of that, and what influences from that are kind of main for us to see throughout your writing, if at all.
There was something I did want to circle back. I wanted to circle back with you on.
For
You were,
sure.
see if I remember it, that you're talking about yeah, messages, right, in writing. And I was on another podcast recently, and Lee Child of Jack Reacher fame
Mm.
happened to be on there. And Lee was mentioning how fiction is actually the best form of writing to deliver a message than say nonfiction books. Most people don't think that. They think, oh, if I want to get something, if I want
Yeah.
to understand something, I need to read Survival 101 book, whatever.
Right.
And the fact is that like, and I've seen this I've gotten thousands of responses over the years from people who've read my books, the apocalyptic books specifically, of how they're reading it and they make that connection with that author. And there's not just a connection; they're making an emotional connection. That's the
Right.
thing. That's the thing you're trying to connect with. You get the heart, and then you have the brain heart coherence that's going on, and then they're seeing characters. They're like, man, this guy's not prepared. I'm never going to do that. So many people over the years have gotten back and was like, I read your books and I realized just how unprepared I was in case something happened. Like I
Right.
need to change that because again, they're putting themselves in the shoes of the character and say the character is a parent and they get their kids and now that parent that individual is not prepared and their kids are suffering because of the parents' lack of preparedness. And so I've seen like that is just a powerful way to deliver messages is have your characters go through, grief or suffering. And then the readers really resonate with that and it really makes them think a lot about their own lives. And so fiction is very powerful. It's a powerful tool to deliver messages. And so I want people to understand don't think that it's not, that you're not just there to entertain, which I think is a very critical thing to do as a writer, entertain people.
Right.
But you can also deliver messages very subtly sometimes. Just again, you're showing the character suffering or showing them going through ordeals or showing them they're making a decision, that decision didn't work. And that resonates with the reader a lot. So you don't have to be completely overt in their face. You have to throw it in their face. But because they're making that connection themselves and they're creating a rapport with the character. And so they're putting themselves in the shoes of it.
For sure.
And going back to my military experience was uh, overall was a great experience. I did 6 years in, three deployments. I'm a person I don't like to look back at my past and have any regrets. And there were times that were very uncomfortable, not very pleasant, hard, like very difficult. But I always reframe everything in my life that anytime it's challenging or difficult or something didn't go my way, that it's an opportunity to learn. That's how I've looked at that as my military background, and my 6 years in was an incredible experience that really set me on the course and put me where I am today, without a doubt. And I definitely infuse that in my books. Like there's a lot of main characters in my apocalyptic fiction that have to be Marines, just because write
Right.
what you know. So I do, and I can write it with realism. So anyone reading the books knows that, like, I know what I'm talking about because I did 6 years infantry, deployed combat. So I know all these things. So I can write it into the books with realism, and people pick up on that, and I'm not bullshitting, right? And I think that's important. And one thing that I did over all my years before I really started writing was read a lot. Like, you do a lot of reading when you're in the Marine Corps or in the service, military in general. You sit around and read. And so I consumed a lot of books. I was tinkering with writing over the years, but I didn't really get in any writing adventure until the children's book. And then I kind of saw, the idea, and you take the idea and then you marry it with, consistency and discipline. Then on the other side of it, you have a product in your hand. You have a book. It's there. It's like that's kind of manifestation, if you really want to call it that. And once I did that, then I knew I could write a novel. And oh yeah, going back to that too, another point you mentioned about one of the reasons I wrote the novel, I always kind of wanted to write one. I had this one in my head. I was always playing like a movie. Is I was finding in the apocalyptic space lots of great books out there, lots of great books, lots of great authors. There was something missing that I wanted. I wanted a very complex plot. I wanted something,
Right.
so I wanted to know what's happening everywhere. And so I was like, well, if I can't find it to read it, I'll write it. And that's what I did. I wrote The End, which is the first book in the series of seven, and there's spin-off. There's a whole universe built around it. And I remember when I got picked up by Penguin, they were like, I was talking to the editorial director, and she was like, this is a very complex plot. And I wanted it that way. I wanted a lot of moving parts. I wanted a lot of POV characters all around the world so the readers can know exactly not just what's happening with this family in San Diego after this event, but what's happening in the military, what's happening in the halls of government. So they
Right.
get a more world view of what's happening in this world and what's going on, instead of leaving things kind of mysterious. It makes it a lot more difficult to write when you got all these moving parts, to try to make sure you don't have any plot holes and gaping, issues
Hmm.
in the writing. But it really made it a very complex story. And I think that also lent to some of its success, is that it wasn't just entertaining, it was captivating.
Right. And one of my most popular episodes on the show is actually titled Using Fictional Writing as a Tool for Political Commentary, because I had an author
Mhm.
who wanted to address situations in the Middle East. And I asked, why not just write about the Middle East? What's going on right now? Why not make a news report? And, we went into the power of, like you said, that relatability that, especially a lot of people who are bombarded daily with the news from social media, mainstream media, they don't want to just spend their free time doing that. But when you're giving it to them in that form that is entertaining but educating, it's more
Mhm.
well receptive. And just people don't realize how powerful that writing is, because you look at like all the TV shows and movies we watched, right? They started as a form of writing, a script, with like MCU and DC as a comic book. And one of the things like we talked about trying to make an impact, a lot of movies we've seen address environmental issues, right? I mean, even from Godzilla to Avatar, we see a lot of
Mhm.
movies and shows, right? Sometimes they're kind of in your face about it, like you said, sometimes they're not. Uh, Sometimes they're just highlighting the beauty of nature and trying to get you to subconsciously think like, wow, we're losing that in the world and we need to do something. Sometimes I think like in one of the Doctor Strange movies across the multiverse, they went to a different world, and in that world they highlighted forget the name of it. It's like brutalism, biological architecture, where every building was covered with vines and flowers to promote, having that industrialized space balanced with nature, right? So I think there's a lot of ways through writing that you can address or promote ideas, whether political, scientific, or whatever it may be. So I completely agree with that. And I like you talked about the realism part of it. So like I think a lot of movies I've watched, and prior to being in the military, I didn't care. But once I was in the military and I watched a movie and there was military stuff, I'm looking at everyone's rank devices. I'm looking at the words they say. And it just has become so funny because they're like calling this guy chief or that guy sir. I'm like, that's completely wrong. Or their uniform is just
Yeah.
wrong. Or I'm watching some Marine movies. I'm like, well, that's not accurate and this and that. And it can be fun, but one of the things I was like, this isn't realistic. And when I write, and I too have some military characters in some of my writing, it's that more realistic approach that people are like, wow, you wouldn't expect this of a military character or what the mainstream media puts forward in the movies and the shows. So, like you said, you have lived experience, and that's what I think makes the Vietnam books some of the best military novels. I know they're not fictional, but even the ones that are fictional based on that real life experience, one of the best moments on my show, in my opinion, was I had a Vietnam veteran who wrote about a Marine's perspective on the Camp Lejeune Act. And so many people are like,
Mm.
hey, veterans are getting payday so nice. He wrote about how this Marine was pissed off because he found out he didn't care about the money. Camp Lejeune had killed his wife and his children with the water.
Yeah,
And
the
that was
toxic
the
water.
first time that I read something that was from a veteran's perspective and not just a civilian perspective on it. And it was great. So I think even when I was in boot camp, I was like, wow, so many movies I've watched, so many books I've read. This is not at all what I expected based on that. At least for the Navy, I can't speak for Army or Marines. I'm sure what you see on TV is probably more accurate than what Navy boot camp was. But I was like, man, this is good content. And I think really dissecting the personalities of people in the military. Like in one of my books, I read about the smoke pit. We had a smoke pit, and all the sailors would go take their smoke break just because they didn't want to work, and they would sit there and talk, and you'd have these conversations between enlisted and higher up that just didn't happen within the workplace, and highlighting stuff like that. And like you said, realizing, man, I'm not prepared, especially when it comes to the dystopian writing. I think it's great for that political commentary. And you mentioned creating something unique that isn't in the space already. And like you said, you're going to get pushback on that. And I think one of my favorite books, not for the plot necessarily or the content, but for its structure, Slaughterhouse-Five, is
Mm.
written where you jump past, present, future. It's kind of all over the place. And I'm sure, I don't know how that was published, but I imagine the conversation was, this is insane. Who's going to want to read this? This is no, because it was something new and unique, just like you're saying, the world is complicated. If there's a global event that is apocalyptic, yeah, you can focus in on one family's view, but it's affecting everyone. So I think pushing through, I guess what I'm trying to say is don't be afraid to push back against that resistance. If you're trying to create something that hasn't done before, people are going to say, hey, we don't know how this is going to do. And you are taking a chance. I'm sure you kind of took the chance that, like, hey, maybe no one's going to buy this book because it's too complicated, but that's what you want to put out.
Yeah, I think the true essence for a writer is just write with that in like don't write with the intention that how would I phrase this? You need to
For
write the story
yourself.
that's coming from you, your heart. That's what
Yeah.
you want to write. If you're just doing it with the intent, that's the other intention that you're. It's hard to I feel to get into a flow state when you're writing because it's not organic. If you're trying to over here to like
Meet
appease
check
or write for
boxes.
some, yeah, you're trying exactly. That's a good way to put it. You're trying to check boxes. It's hard to kind of connect with your book that way
Yeah.
and kind of get into that flow state. And I like look at writers like we took American literature that have kind of broken the molds. You've got kind of the silent generation writers. You've got Ernest Hemingway, right? When his style of writing was new at that time, and then you jump a few decades later, you got J.D. Salinger, and everyone that was the critiques, the critics, weren't quite sure when he was being educated. The professors were reading his stuff, and they're like, "What is this?" Catcher in the Rye, and it was just a completely different way of writing, and the way, and they weren't but he revolutionized it. I mean, we all know Catcher in the Rye. We know J.D. Salinger. I mean, I think that was
Right.
he did other books after that, but that was it. That was his kind of opus, and it was the one that we all know. And it wasn't a great book, but it completely changed writing. 100%. American literature changed at that moment. And then other people started to want to write like him. And I think it's okay. I'm not by the way putting myself in that camp at all. But I think it's okay to take risks. But the main point I would say is you're taking the risk. Are you doing it because you're wanting to tell that story? Don't be checking boxes. Just write that story you want to write. And that's what I did. I wanted the readers to see what was happening everywhere and
Yeah.
how complicated and how diverse reactions and decisions are being made. A decision in the families versus the decision in the military ranks versus the government. And all these things are happening. It makes for a very complex plot and a lot of moving pieces. But I just really wanted the readers to get a full breath on what's happening in the world after this massive global. It was ended up being a global event. But yeah, going back to the military, this is something that I always pick up on. I do the same thing. I'm like watching TV and reading books. Like, what?
Yeah.
Whoever they did not have any technical advisors. I can tell you that. And this is where you lose people. So if you've got an audience that is say primarily you have a demo that say 10% are military, former military people, and you're getting those things wrong, they're now questioning what else are you getting wrong? If you can't if you can't just get that basic stuff down, rank structure, again, whether Marines don't wear covers inside, you know what I'm saying? Like we don't salute inside, we stand at attention.
Put in the
Those little kind of
research.
yeah. Then what else? Like, specifically, if you're writing hard science fiction and you're writing something like that, people are like, well, is the rest of like, how would I believe any of this? Like, it's just so you can't even get you're too lazy to even take the time out to do that. And the same thing when you're writing science fiction. I've written a couple too. You can make up stuff. That's fine. Plasma rifles and all this cool stuff. But when you're writing something that's contemporary or even historical, and say you're dealing with weapons, if you can't get weapons right,
Like the
again,
Titanic.
you're just going or any kind of technical thing about something. But this is what always gets like a big part of my demo, or vets or preppers and survivalists. They're a solid chunk of my demo, and they're really hard on that. They're like, if you can't get weapons right, you can't like you're talking about a slide on a revolver. Well, like, revolvers don't have slides; they have cylinder. Like it's like
Yeah.
those little details. Like they literally stop reading. Like I'm done. I'm never going to read another book from this person. They don't know what they're talking about. It's clear,
Hmm.
so that you lose them. So it's if you're taking the amount of time to write a book, which is what it is. It's a lot of time, a lot of man hours. Um, then do that right. Do that research. If you're going to enter in a weapon system, if you're going to do this, you're going to have a ship, whatever.
Yeah.
Just take a little bit of time. The internet's an incredible resource to use. Do some research. Go on YouTube. Watch some videos. Understand what you're doing. Um, but yeah, realism. That's one reason when I look at writers that I really gravitated toward and I read when I was young, and all the way up until today is Ernest Hemingway. You read his stuff and it like he was the guy who done things though. He'd been around the world. So when he's writing, it's believable because he'd been there, done that. And he was that guy. And I love that. That was something I was like, it really came through in his words, like he had actually experienced these things. And I appreciate that. And I think it conveys on the page if you take lived experiences and put them on there, it transfers to the reader.
For sure, especially with the medical stuff, like I know people who will consult with doctors first when writing. And a joke I saw on the internet once, it was like an author's computer history is so weird. You'll have like, what is the expiration date of a can of tomato sauce from 1967? And also, how long does it
That's
take for
so
a
true.
person to bleed out if they're cut on their big toe diagonally? Like very
That's so
specific
true.
questions. It was a joke was like, Dear FBI, I'm an author, so all these weird questions are
It's
for
true. Like
fictional novels.
I'm I'm clearly on some watch list because you just see
Yeah.
my search history. It's
Yeah.
like how much is the fallout from a nuclear dirty bomb? Like, oh my God, who's
Right.
this guy?
Right. Exactly. And I know one of the things you said which I'll caution people is, especially with realistic science fiction, you have leeway with the word
Yeah.
fiction, right? But one of my biggest pet peeves of all time is when especially a movie or a book, has kind of like their own rules of that world that they then violate or stretch. So if you have this kind of technology, but then you extend it to, and one of the things I hated most was like one of the movie series I was watching, it was all technology, realistic science, and then suddenly they kind of tried integrating magic this one time, and then it doesn't make it like it didn't fit in.
Hmm.
I hate when things are there. You can have fiction, but if you've set up boundaries within that, you have to follow
Hmm.
those world's rules. And so that's one of my pet peeves. And like,
100%.
if you're gonna add
100%.
in scientific facts that, because I've seen some shows where it's like they didn't need to add in the scientific fact, but they did, and then it was wrong, right? So if you're gonna go out of your way to add in information, make sure it's accurate. Like you said,
Yeah.
take the time and do the research. I know I was recently on a show talking about podcast creation and business, and I talked about how everyone's hot to trot to get it out there as fast as possible. That was one of my biggest mistakes as an author. The book series wasn't ready yet, but I was just like, I want it out, I want it out, I want it out, right? It's pride. You want your creation out there. You want to see the book cover. You want to see it on Amazon or the internet. Like we take pride in that, but take the time, slow down, and make sure it's a good project first. In the military, we had an expression, first time quality impression. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. If you rush through it and then you have to end up rewriting the whole series or taking it down and republishing it, that's a lot of time and, as we mentioned, money that you're wasting then. So take the time to make it a good product. I know, I get it. Every time I start writing a book, I'm like, I want this out now. And I hate anytime something delays me. My last book, God vs. Indomitable Human Spirit, was supposed to be out half a year ago. But it grew into a bigger project. And I said, you know what? I've learned my lessons the hard way. If it's growing and it still has more, let it grow, you know? And just going back to the complicated, I thought immediately of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, one of the greatest
Mm.
novels of all time, written when she was 14. A story within a story with another story within it. That was complicated. I'm sure people were like, this is hard to track, but that's one of the greatest things. And I really like the writing for yourself, not for others, right? Write for yourself first. Nowadays, especially, we see a lot of people have tried to say things about characters in their books or change things to appease certain audiences or moving forward they change their books. And remember Nicholas Sparks, King of Romance, right? I
Hmm.
haven't read any of his books. I've watched all the movies, so I'm a hypocrite. I got to read the books, but one of his books in particular, he wrote a tragic ending. And people were so upset that they wrote him all this mail, and he ended up rewriting and republishing the book with a different
Yeah.
ending, or at least the movie.
Right.
And for me, I lost some respect for him to a degree. I've had people say, "Hey, Mr. Whiskey, we see you really like to write tragedy. You like killing characters. You're gonna lose all your people who read your books because they don't like when characters die." I said, "Okay, but this is the real world. People die, right? All right, we
Hmm.
don't. The real world, there isn't this main character energy, this plot armor, right? That's not real life. All right. If you want to have that in your anime or TV show, for sure. If you want to have that in your fictional book series, but I want my writing to be realistic. People die, accidents happen, right? Like that's the reality of it. And I'm not going to change up that to appease people and say, all right, you know what? One of my pet peeves is when they keep bringing a character back from the dead because fans are going to be unhappy if this character disappears. And it's like, especially in TV shows and movies or books I'm reading or watching, and I'm like, it gets to the point where I'm like, I'm not even able to mourn this character's death because you've shown that you're an author who's just gonna bring them back, bring them back. So I think, there's balance to be had. Yeah, you want the sales, you want people to like your stuff, but you should want them to like it. It's just like dating in real life, right? You want them to like you for you, not for this front you put out.
Yeah, you mentioned that, but there are times though that when writers kill off the main character who's the only anchor for the
Right,
plot,
right.
and then then they've got nothing else. The other characters aren't strong enough to carry the plot. The Last of Us, I think, if you want to talk about contemporary stuff that's out there, when you look at the first season, even like the first season of the game, have you seen any of it or heard about it?
No, no, but your
Yeah.
spoiler warning for everyone. We're gonna get into it.
Oh yeah, yeah. We can get into this. So it was a video game, The Last of Us.
Right.
It's about apocalyptic mutants and things. I think it was with mushrooms or whatever it is. Anyway, the first you get the main character, the protagonist is Joel, and everyone's connected to him. He's got Ellie, he's taking care of her, blah 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 blah, and he creates this interesting father-daughter dynamic. Well, and then comes season two of the game, and they kill him off like within no time. But the issue lies that she's not the strong enough anchor for it to carry it on anyway. It's like so there is a problem in storytelling, and they did the exact same thing, and it pissed off everybody, by the way, and their sales
Mhm.
tanked. And did the exact they did they, so knowing that happened 5 years ago, they roll out the TV show. They do the exact same thing in episode 2 to season 2, and
Mhm.
they're just cratering. And it's like Game of Thrones. George was able to like do that perfectly, where you have Sean Bean who's playing Stark, Ned Stark. If you're, I'm not sure if you've seen Game of Thrones, but or read it, you've got, again, he's notorious for just whacking people, but he's created a cast of characters that are equal in strength,
Right.
that can carry the plot along, that can drive the story. There just wasn't enough. When you go look, and when you put it in contrast to The Last of It, there's just not that many strong characters. The cast isn't actually that vast. Where Game of Thrones, I mean, George has created this incredible world, right? And again, all these multiple kind of characters that are on par with each other, and they all can carry the mantle of being the protagonist and carry on. And that's when you can kill a character that comes unexpected, who you think is, and by the way, it's shocking, but it also makes you really invested in that world, right? And that's,
Right.
I do that as well. Like, I look at like you said, there's no plot armor for my characters, and that is, for the most part. I definitely, the story's built around Gordon Van Zant, the series is, and so you're kind of following him. That's just across the series arc. It's his. He's the guy, you're following him, but everyone else beneath him, very lovable characters, are all up to get the axe. And I've taken out people and pissed people off. But the reality is, if you're living in an apocalyptic world, that is what you can expect. You can expect
Yeah.
somebody that's beloved, that you're connected to, that's important, gone. Because I want the readers to feel in shock, just like the characters feel in shock. I want them to feel that emotional loss, just like the characters are feeling that emotional loss. I also want them to be like, oh wow, they're looking around too, like what's going to happen? Because that's an
Mhm.
apocalyptic world. They have
Yeah.
no idea what's going to happen around the corner. Like someone that they love and hold dear, so it makes them anxious. I do that deliberately. I want them anxious. I want them nervous. I don't want them like knowing, oh, everything's going to be fine. No, it's not going to be fine. And some characters that you love are going to get smoked, and that's how it is. And some of it brutally. And I've gotten heat for it. And like book 2, I got a lot of heat for one of those characters. I that I like I committed I broke a couple taboos on that one. But
Right.
even my wife was mad at me when she was like reading it after. She's like, "You can't do that." I'm like, "I'm doing it." Like, you can't
Yeah.
do that. Like, it's happening. And but it was also, it just wasn't done. It
Randomly.
just
Right.
wasn't done just to do it. It wasn't for it was done to motivate the protagonist, Gordon Van Zant. That event shifted him as a character. It made him, his entire perspective changed in that
Mhm.
world, and his actions no longer were going to be the actions he had before. He realized, he came out of that, he grew from that experience, and like, okay, I need to be more thoughtful about my decision making, because I just lost this person and it was my fault. And again, it was a way for him to change as a character, and then every decision is different than it was before. But it was also very powerful. There's multiple reasons I did it. But yeah, there are times though that a writer can knock off a character that it's just
Right.
not smart. You got to have other characters that can carry the mantle if you're taking your protagonist out, the main person. If he's gone, who's carrying the torch? And are they strong enough of a character that people are going to follow?
Yeah, and if that's your ending or your series is ended, uh, I personally don't believe in like, oh, people really want a sequel or this or that. If you ended it, the way you wanted, and that's that, that's that. Trust me, there are plenty of books I've read. I'm like, man, I wish there was more, but that's the story. That's that. And I think
I think
there's
you're right
some,
too. Yeah, when I finished the end, I could have, the books sold. I sold so many books, and I was like, I could just, my wife said, why don't you just keep it going? I'm like, it's not realistic. Like,
yeah,
there's only so many bullets he can dodge. Like,
right.
it
Don't
I
milk it out.
wanted to keep that sense of realism, and to leave on a high note. Like, this is it. There's a finale, this is the way the world looks, and I left it with a lot of other very strong characters that I developed over that 7 book series. And when it needed to end, it ended. And I ended up continuing this series with just a spin-offs with some other characters that became fan favorite characters. People wanted to kind of explore. their origin story and how they kind of, intermix with that main canon and those main characters, and they were on their own journey, and also exploring other parts of the country and things like that. It was easy to expand the universe by just not messing with those characters, but just going into other parts and creating characters, because there's a whole world to deal with, right? If you build a world, you can have all kinds of fun, right? But for the main characters, when their time was done, I felt in my heart it was done. I just didn't want this. Like, nothing's worse than readers or viewers or whatever. Like, oh my God, this has gotten, it needs to end. This is bad. Like, this is, The Walking Dead is one of those. Like, I'm going to keep referencing apocalyptic fiction and story.
Yeah.
It's just like, if it is like, okay, I think season 14 is enough. I think we're done. I think
Yeah.
we're done at
Or
like
like
season
the
eight.
Flash series fell off. They kept making
Oh, yeah.
like the problem was like you said, you can only dodge so many bullets. Oh, he's not the fastest man alive. Here's someone faster. Here's someone faster. Here's someone fast. Like, come on. How many speedsters can we get that are faster? How many ways can we make the Flash faster so he's now on par with this other speedster? And then they're trying to make other villains and this and that. So I mean, we've seen it in plenty of different forms of fiction. It's like kind of with other series. Like people loved Iron Man and Captain America, especially the actors who played those. They can only
Mm-hmm.
be that person for so long. That's realistic. We can't just keep making movie after movie. Like even Batman, eventually steps down as Batman. I mean, he gets old. I mean, that's just the truth of the world.
Yeah.
So I think it's cool. So what I want to do is focus in here. We've discussed a lot of points. What would be your main message? Why are you guesting on podcasts? What is the message you want to put forward?
Yeah, I know you asked me before we jumped on, and do I have any like specific book to promote? And I don't. I've got a great catalog of books for people to see. Go on my website at gmichaelhoff.com, Amazon. Some are sitting in bookstores and Barnes and Noble and whatnot. So I've got a lot of great books out there, I believe. Whether it's apocalyptic fiction, westerns, which I really got into. I did really well with the western genre, by the way, really, really well. I stuck to just kind of that really central Western theme, I did kind of include more of kind of an anti-hero in a lot of those. And those books did really, really well for me. I was really, really
Yeah.
excited. And actually, genre jumping, I was a little nervous at the time when I did it. And there was actually a lot of my audience that did jump over and continue to read the Western. And because the Western is kind of apocalyptic anyway, you're kind of living in some, the Wild West, some wasteland, and
Yeah.
just there. Some of the themes can be very similar, and the characters are still rugged. It's action adventure, so I got some crossover there. I've jumped in some other genres that are paranormal, and not much of my audience jumped over for that. But I was
Mm.
introduced to some new readers, and they jumped in it. So that's just me kind of exploring different. I've written horror
Yeah.
as well, and just because I'm writing things that I want to write. That's kind
Yeah.
of where I'm really blessed, and I'm doing what I want to write and telling some really cool stories. What's interesting about the horror is it got optioned. That's the craziest thing. So I did this apocalyptic horror story. It was a novella that I did as a part of. The origin of that was it's called Mother, and I did that with Nicholas Sansbury Smith when he had was it Kindle had a program years ago called Kindle Worlds, where other writers could write into other writers' universes, right? And he had a series called the Extinction Cycle. And Nick and I are friends, and he's New York Times bestseller. He's got a book series out that's doing really well called Hell Divers. I encourage people to check it out.
Mm.
And so I wrote into his Extinction Cycle series, and it did really well. It was really cool. I came up with this interesting, like, story of these. It's this apocalyptic world where these mutants are created from some like virus or whatever. Anyway, so it was more about these two twins that are serial killers on a farm. So it was this kind of complete departure from the typical. He has a lot of military, and they're fighting these variants, and all this stuff's going on. So it has that kind of element to it if you like military. And but I was like, I'm gonna do something completely different. I'm gonna have like this. It's like a horror story where these like sadistic 13-year-old serial killers are on a farm, and they're luring people to the farm. And it's where they slaughter them, and it's a complete departure. But people loved it. They were like, "This is such a cool story." I mean, the fans of his series thought it was so cool because it was so different than everything else. But
Right.
it was in his universe, and they thought it was just an interesting take. And that actually got optioned. And we were close. We'd actually gotten some money for. We had raised 2 million. we were the script is already done. We had all that. We were going to film in Budapest, and then the SAG writer strike happened, and that just kind of threw everything up in
Mm,
the air, and
yeah.
everything went to shit. And then it just now it's just sitting on the back burner somewhere. But I never knew when I wrote this. He talking about taking risk. I think you and I were talking about that. Like that was just like I'm going to write this like crazy horror story about these
Yeah.
sadistic twins and these people that encounter them, and that does not end like it's not a happy ending. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
And like, but it did really well, and so much that it got picked up to be made into a movie. So yeah, you can take risks as a writer, but then again taking the risk because that's the story you want to write. Not you're
Hmm.
not trying to check the boxes like you're saying. Like I wanted to
Yeah.
write a this seemed like a really cool, exciting story. But yeah, I mainly am kind of doing podcast stories, like I tell you, because I just want to, if I can bring value to other writers by my experience. I'm a hybrid author. I've got books with Penguin, other big publishing houses. I've also self-published successfully. I've got a couple publishing companies. I'm in some other adjacent companies that I'm starting that are all kind of adjacent to publishing and writing. So I'm really immersed into it. So if I can bring any value to writers or aspiring writers, I'd love to do that because I was helped out right at the beginning
Mm.
in my writing journey, meaning that after I hit self-publish on the end. By the way, that's an interesting. I had an agent for that book, and then I fired her. I fired her because he was just a pain in the ass. Actually, I take that back. Margaret, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. But it was just like it wasn't going the way I wanted it to go.
Right.
And I fired her, which everyone said, "You're crazy. It's hard to get an agent. What are you doing?" I was like, I just didn't like it. The beta readers were getting back to me. And the beta readers I'd created were like really a core demo. Like they didn't think that she wanted to change big parts of the book
Right.
to kind of bring it in alignment with what like these publishers might be looking for. And I was like, no, my heart says, my gut says the story's
Right.
good. I've given it out to a lot of they love the story, they love it, they're connecting with it. I'm not writing for everybody. I'm writing to a
Hmm.
key. This is my audience. I know the people I'm writing for, and I'm writing that's I'm not trying to write for everybody.
Yeah.
And I hit self-publish on it, and then it just took off. And then but yeah, like if I can bring value to anybody for my story, and where I've come in my journey, I'm here to help do that. Oh yeah, so after I self-published, I was competing with this guy Doug Richards, New York Times bestseller, and guy he's multiple New York Times bestseller, and he and I were competing in the charts. And I was like, so I just reached out to him and said, "Hey, you got any advice for a new author?" He's like, "Absolutely." And we found out he was also in San Diego. He goes, "Let me take you to lunch." I'm like, all right.
Wow.
So I went to lunch with him, and he just like opened up, told me, gave me all this incredible advice. I think he had been with at that time with Macmillan, and was talking to me about it. I hadn't yet got my contract from Penguin, but he was like invaluable. Like when I did get the contract from Penguin, then we sat down again. We were just talking. It was just so nice to have somebody like a mentor like that to kind of guide me through that beginning phase because you can make a lot of mistakes and
I have
right
done that.
and it
Yeah.
can and it can cost time and money. What you
Hmm.
don't want it to do is cost reputation, and that's the
Yeah.
worst thing. And so he helped me out a lot. And so, like, if I can bring that, I've been doing it since. If I can bring that to new authors or aspiring authors, I'd love to share, my advice with people.
Yeah. And it's don't be afraid to fire people. I know when I mentioned Peter Gunn earlier, he was doing epic poetry. And for those of you who don't know what it is, it's linked lyrical poetry. It's a very specific format structure. I couldn't imagine writing it. Writing plain English is enough for me. And he had to make up some words in order to keep that format and still get the theme across. And his editors were like, nope, this is a made up word. You can't use it. He's like, people are going to understand what it means. There's enough context. And he fired a lot of people. Sometimes you gotta do that. Sometimes you're going to have disagreements with people, right? Sometimes, especially if you're, like we mentioned earlier, if your writing style is unique, if your formatting is unique, still legible, understandable, right? But if it's something very different, you're going to get that resistance. So, and in your case, you've been very successful despite having to fire people, right? So don't be
Yeah, but there
afraid.
was a second
Definitely.
time. yeah, real quick. There was a second time though. There are consequences. Like I had really positive consequences from firing her. I then got another ad, so I get picked up by Penguin. Everything's going in smooth. Uh, they might have mishandled some stuff here and there, but the point of I want to make is that I get picked up by another agent, this guy in LA, and I am very impatient now, and I terminate him, thinking I'll have the same result. I think I was too hasty in terminating him, and because I was trying to push him to get me some things done, and he was just, I would just be patient. It's fine. We're going to work this out. We're going to this.
Right.
We're going to line up, line. And that is where I had a little bit of hubris going on at the time, and because I got this, I scored this really big deal with Penguin, and I was like, I don't know, I got impatient. So you went back and you were talking about patience earlier, right?
Yeah.
Like I should have been more patient, more thoughtful, and I did it for two different reasons. So when I let Margaret go, that was because that was genuine based upon wanting to change the book, but my gut's telling me because these readers like, no, and I can't do it. And she pretty much told me like, I'm not going to represent you. I was like, okay, I'll let you go. The other one was absolutely me in it, with a sense of hubris, not
Right.
listening when I should have been patient, and then I probably lost out on opportunities because of that. So like two different reasons. Like my reason with Margaret was completely like legit. With the other person was not, and I that is one thing that I've like it's made me more thoughtful as a person going forward in my career. Like don't be so hasty. So not all things have worked out for me. I do learn still.
Right. Well, you jumped in right as I was about to say, don't just fire without listening first, right?
Yeah,
Always
there you go.
seek that counseling and advice, listen first, make educated decisions.
Yeah.
And I like that you said, like I mentioned earlier, you're hot to trot to get it out, especially if you've had success already, all the more to like keep it going, keep it going. And yeah, I hope everyone found this inspirational. I know I did. I had one of the first books I started writing that I ended up never publishing. It's been on the back burner was a controversial Western. And it was funny. Part of the reason I paused from it was because I had gone from hard science fiction to a Western. I went from atomic physics to the bone archer and drinking alcohol and shooting guns. Like it was such a, not just the genre, but the education level, the writing style, the dialect. I was like, oh, I need to research this because like we mentioned earlier, I wanted an accurate Western. Um, and what I will say is, I gotta bring that back out. So that's gonna be, one of the things about being an author is, every time you start writing something, you end up making other books along the way somehow or ideas. Like I've got a list of 80 books I want to write, and half of them some of them have chapters, some of them have pages, some of them are almost done, some of them haven't been started yet. It keeps building on itself. I think, the more you write, the easier it becomes, the more you want to write. And I think,
Hmm.
one of the pieces of advice that you kind of mentioned subtly that I haven't followed, though I have found it helpful when I have followed it, is read. If you want to get better at
Hmm.
writing, read because what you'll find is we talked about unique writing styles, unique formats. The more you read, the more you discover certain ways things are written that might be very useful for your book if you're
Hmm.
having trouble finding how do I want to write this? How do I want to convey this? Or what style do I want? There are so many, I mean, there are millions of books out there, right? And I have discovered the more you read, you'll find certain ways to convey things, different writing styles. So make sure you read. In fact, you should just go ahead to gmichaelhoff.com and start reading today. There are over 40 books there for you to start reading. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll have that link in the description below. But, Mr. Hoff, I'd like to thank you for coming on the show. It's great to talk to another writer and hear the good and the bad and ugly of it all. Ladies and gentlemen, I highly encourage you to check out that website, find a book for you. There's post-apocalyptic, Western, horror, paranormal, and who knows, maybe one day, Mr. Hoff, you might end up doing a romance. You never know.
Yeah, I don't want to. Anything's possible, I guess.
Yeah. But
But
thank you
there'll
for
probably
coming
be
on the
some people
show.
dying in it, though. That's the whole thing. It'd be one of those kind of really odd romance books where people die.
I've got one of those on the back burner, trust me. So yeah,
You
but
should write that Western. I'm telling you, you should write it. It's a fun genre to get into.
Yeah, I'm doing something very unique with it. Something that's I think is going to get me a lot of hate from some parties, but I think there's a lot of Westerns that I read. I just felt like we're kind of copy and paste, and I want to do something that hasn't done
Mm.
before, like we've discussed. I'm going to be taking a risk with it, but I'm excited for it. So, and you know what, we might have to get together again on the show when it comes out, and I'm sure
I'd love to.
you'll probably have like 10 more books by that time. So, yeah.
I don't know about that, but I'd love to. I'm actually interested in hearing about it. So,
Yeah, I expect a children's book for your grandkids by that time.
oh my God, so you're really pushing that far, huh?
Yeah, yeah. But thank you for coming on the show. I hope, like I said, that you've inspired some people. You know, like you said, writing is more than just creating entertainment and just it's also a form of therapy for ourselves, for
Mhm.
our readers, and it's something that can connect us in different ways. So I really appreciate you putting out all this content into the world.
Of course, I love it. It's what I do. So, thank you, man, for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity to be on your show.
Sailing through the ocean blue, nuclear reactors, my crew, guiding the ship, the stars as our guide, through the waves we ride, jokes and laughter fill the air. On this voyage we have to share, working together, side by side, as one family we will abide. In the heart of the ship we reside, nuclear operators with pride, powering the vessel with every stride. Our mission, a source of great pride.